So good that they're being used.
So whoever hammered in those inflatable.
Let's get the stress test right now. A few weeks ago we had a wind that was very strong. We're in May. They're not like air industrial climbing for something that works.
Wind tunnel tested officially.
No, it has been now.
Oh, that's fine. Oh, you're okay.
You'll be on video anyway, we won't.
South.
Yeah.
Okay, so.
You know, we're like 225, 225, we're right in that little corner.
Okay. Is that considered Parker?
No, Parker is, we already got south.
Okay. The tech center area?
Yeah, it's just north.
I did some training over this year, right at that corner, into the big building by the wall.
Oh, really? Oh, boy.
It's simple.
Where's the JV?
Larimer Square, basically. Technically Ryder Square, but you know Larimer Street, where they have like the lights at night over the street right there. Right there, smack in the middle of downtown.
Now, is that where you can go down? Is
It is. Yeah, that's my primary office. I'm there sometimes 0 days a week, some weeks 2 or 3. I'm on the list. That is my office in Spain. Yeah, you know, like, I work from home for an hour and then drive 2 hours, have a week, drive 3 hours, have another meeting. Yeah, I mean, this is very typical. It's not uncommon for me to drive 500 miles a week. I just use my personal vehicle mileage.
In some cases, that works out. Sure.
Yeah, I think it's kind of a bridge. And you still have to maintain your car. I think the benefit of having a car is right now I need mileage. I need it.
About 3 miles.
Is that right?
There you go.
All right, we're going to call the order of the meeting of December 11th, 2018 at 6:36 p.m. Can I have a moment of silence for all those serving inside and outside our borders, please? All right, will you please stand for me for the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call please, Mary.
Mayor Adrian Sandoval.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Larry Clark.
Here.
Harold Leggett. Nick Ralston.
Here.
Spencer Bradnan.
Here.
Troy Blum.
Here.
Hope Morris. Here.
All right, can I get a motion to approve the agenda?
I move to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Just the regular agenda.
Or just the regular agenda?
Yes. Second. All right, I have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Now, the reason that has happened 2 weeks in a row is because the first thing says move to approve the consent agenda. That's why.
Okay. Mayor Kay.
Oh, I'll consent.
Thank you.
Which one of us don't you want to appeal for?
All right, audience participation. I have Lynn Taylor. Will you stand and state your address, please?
Lynn Taylor, 405 Division.
Did you want to speak?
I'm concerned from what I've read in the newsletter that comes with the utility bills about the
what seems to be an inevitable hike in water, sewage, base, and usage fees, as well as what appears to be an impending hike in sanitation or garbage collection fees to fund public works. It's been my education and understanding that public works falls into two categories, one of which is public works that we all use. That would include wastewater treatment facilities, hospitals, roads, bridges, tunnels, and the like, things that everyone in the population uses. These are universally funded by governmental entities, regardless of what kind of formation that government takes, whether it's a statutory town like Platteville, a home rule charter, or a large city. These are, without exception, funded by the government and not its residents through however you wish to spin it. You raised fees, capital improvement funds, or tariffs, or which are nothing more than taxes. The residents are not expected to carry the burden of funding the planning, engineering, or construction and initial capital outlay for building public works that everyone uses. Typically, these are funded through the issuance of bonds. I am well aware through searching public documents through CDPH&E, the initial JVA study done in 2010, and other available documents, that this was initially looked at in 2010 when the prices would have been much lower, but yet the tap fees were also considered being raised then to $68.79. It is extremely easy to get a bond issue on the ballot. All that it would have required is the town manager asking the board of trustees to draw up a resolution. Town manager signs it, takes it to the Weld County Board of Commissioners by April, and it would have been on the November 18th midterm ballot. Many other municipalities have bond issues on there that passed, and bond issues for wastewater treatment facilities almost always are passed because it's a health issue. We knew, meaning Platteville knew, by December that this was coming. We knew years before it was necessary. The final word from CDPH&E came down in March. There was time to get this done and get it on the ballot. Residents are unhappy about this. They feel disenfranchised from their government. I am unhappy about this. I think this is not the way to go about it. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn. Anybody else want to stand? All right. Okay, moving forward, I entertain a motion for the consent agenda that includes the meeting minutes for December 4th, 2018 regular meeting, the financials, and the pay bills.
Make a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented.
Second.
A motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Moving forward, action items. Wastewater utility plan update presentation, JVA, Mr. Rankin.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. As you're well aware, the wastewater utility issues here tonight to be discussed. This past December, we did receive our compliance schedule or permit review back from CDPH&E. There are several standards that our lagoon system will no longer be able to meet during our next compliance schedule or during our next permit time period. A number of months ago, the town contracted with JVA, who initially did their utility plan back in 2010 and 11, to update the plan, which is required. And also this time, we also contracted through JVA Rocktellus for a financial plan to fund the new wastewater mechanized plant. You're aware of the compliance schedule. By 2019, we need to have the D&E, the design engineering, completed and start securing funding in 2020 and 2021, and have the plant built and online by 2022. hopefully by 2021, if we can. Tonight, representing JV is Simon Farrell. We have a presentation, they have a presentation before you. JV will go first, followed by Brian Kirsch with Raptelis, and discuss the financial plan, and then I'm sure we'll have a lot of questions and answers at the end of the presentation. Okay? Simon?
Thank you very much. We were testing with the lights before, and I think we determined this was going to be the easiest way to see it. Is that too dark, or?
No.
Okay. Thank you for the introduction. I'm Simon Farrell with JVA. I've been working on the update to the wastewater utility plan. And as Troy mentioned, we're just here to give you kind of a high-level overview of what's contained in that report. I believe you've all had a chance to review it. And this will be a summary of the key facts. So the town of Platteville obviously currently has a wastewater utility plan. It was last updated in 2010, and that was submitted to the North Front Range Water Quality Association. And it really is a document that just shows what the intent is of the town moving forward in order to meet water quality regulations and handle growth. It's a way to have cohesive planning for a regional area within the state. As part of this update, we're looking at wastewater treatment. And the point I wanted to make here is what's the driver for the project. This was touched on earlier. The 2010 wastewater utility plan, the driver was a little more related to growth, whereas what we're going to see in this wastewater utility plan with a newly issued discharge permit, the driver here is really regulatory compliance as opposed to growth. We're going to talk about the design capacity. That's just a fancy word for what's the amount of wastewater that your existing system can handle in a day. We're proposing to keep that at the same rate that it is at right now. We've gone out and we've looked at a lot of different technologies, and ultimately the recommended technology for the town of Platteville moving forward is a sequencing batch reactor. This is the same technology that was recommended back in 2010. I think that just speaks to the fact that it hits a certain price point, is able to meet certain effluent limits, where once again we stack it up against competing technologies, it's come out ahead. Then Brian's going to come up. He's with Raptelis. He's the financial consultant. He'll talk about the financial plan that's been prepared, some of the assumptions in that financial plan, the results, potential rate increases, and the system investment charges. And we'll have time for question and answer.
Simon, can I add a couple of things?
Absolutely.
As we have a relatively new board, back in 2010, Simon referred to the initial utility plan. The driving force behind that was the annexation of West Farm on the west side of County Road 32.5 past the river. At that time, the drive behind it is the town has a 208 boundary, which is our wastewater service area, which David manages, and we had to do a plan to incorporate West Farms into our service boundary through the 208 committee, and also look at how that development, if it came through, could be part of our treatment facility. And so that was the driving force behind that, not that we weren't meeting compliance schedule at the time. And then also just a reminder, the water and sewer funds are enterprise funds. They're business-like account funds, unlike the general funds, so they're treated a little bit differently. So I may interject every once in a while just to add
As
on.
you should.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm going to start off with what current wastewater treatment looks like in the town of Platteville, in case you're not familiar. And I think this schematic is pretty representative. So, wastewater treatment here in the town of Platteville starts with an influent pumping station once it makes it to the wastewater treatment facility. Wastewater is then lifted to a slightly higher elevation where it passes through a lagoon-based treatment. Lagoons are very prevalent in the state of Colorado, particularly for rural communities. And you have a 2-cell lagoon that you'll see aeration systems in there, so you're injecting air when mixing in order to treat the wastewater. It goes through a complete mixed lagoon, a partial mixed lagoon, and then you've probably seen the reed beds. We refer to those as constructed wetlands. That can be thought of as kind of final polishing before you're getting ready to discharge. Before discharge, the wastewater is disinfected, so we add bleach effectively, sodium hypochlorite. There's a chlorine contact basin. We then dechlorinate the wastewater effluent before it's discharged to the South Platte River. This is a pretty typical lagoon-based wastewater treatment facility that you have right now. And the currently permitted hydraulic capacity, the amount of flow it can receive in one day, is 0.348 MGD. MGD stands for millions of gallons per day. So the town can generate up to 348,000 gallons of wastewater in one day and not be any issues with the hydraulic capacity of your current permit. You generate quite a bit less than that. So on an average day, you generate about 40% of that amount, or about 140,000 gallons per day. The point being, your existing hydraulic capacity of your wastewater plant, there's room for growth without changing that number, because you're only reaching about 40% of that permitted amount currently. I think another thing that's worth mentioning is that these lagoons are clay lined. There's not a synthetic liner in those lagoons. So although you're receiving about 140,000 gallons per day at the start of your treatment process, only about 70,000 gallons per day is being discharged. You're losing about 50% of the wastewater effluent that's generated in the town through seepage in the lagoons. This is very typical for clay-lined lagoons. Unless you have an impervious liner, it's typical to see those types of infiltration rates. And that was one thing that played into the alternatives analysis of why it's hard to retrofit your lagoon, because you would have to also reline the lagoons in order to continue to use them. As Troy touched on, in the 2010 wastewater utility plan, due to the West Farm development, there was a desire to increase the design capacity from the 0.348 where it was to 0.7, about double the size of the treatment capacity. Ultimately, that growth has not materialized, and you pay per gallon. There is some economy of scale, but we're going to propose to keep the design flow the same it is right now, 0.348 million gallons per day, and take advantage of that hydraulic capacity that you currently have. So what is driving the project? It's the new discharge permit that was issued by the Colorado Department of Public Health and Environment, CDPHE, Water Quality Control Division, in May 2018. It was issued in March, effective in May. I'm sure you're familiar with the permit. If you're not, one of the unique things about this discharge permit is it does include a compliance schedule. So it does say, okay, you're going to have new limits, but they don't become effective day one. They give you some interim metrics for meeting those limits. Step one being retaining an engineer in order to put together a planning document, which you've already completed. So since 2012, the town has experienced a growth rate of about 1.3%. Moving forward, we're applying the same growth rate. 1.3% moving forward for the next 20 years brings the residential population in 2038 to 3,480. And 20 years is a pretty typical planning horizon for this type of infrastructure. We've talked about the fact that the existing wastewater plant receives 40%, and we're proposing to keep that same hydraulic capacity. This project is really being driven by the compliance schedule and the need to meet new effluent limits, as opposed to the need to meet significant growth.
Simon, can you point out the benefit to keeping the 348,000 gallons as far as, and you might be already getting to that, I apologize.
No, so anytime you're changing your permit with the state, you're opening up the ability for changes. So one benefit of not changing the town's discharge permit is that we won't need to apply for PELs as part of the design process, which is actually the next interim step the town needs to meet in the compliance schedule. The PELs, all that is it's saying, here's what we anticipate the limits to be on your new discharge permit. It's their guess what those limits will be at that new flow. We don't have to take that step, so there's less uncertainty. We can say, we already know what the limits are going to be at 0.348 MGD because they're already in the permit, and it's not a dynamic thing that we have to worry about changing. So we need to meet these new effluent limits specific to nitrogen started in 2023. And the challenge is to meet the ammonia and the nitrate limits with lagoon-based systems. So I want to be clear that no one at the state is saying you can't use a lagoon system. They're not forcing any type of technology. They're saying that you have to meet these limits for ammonia and nitrate. They're just very difficult to meet with lagoon-based treatment systems. To put this into perspective, there's a drinking water standard for nitrate. The drinking water standard for nitrate is 10 milligrams per liter. You can't have a potable water source that has more than 10 milligrams per liter of nitrate. That's the same amount of nitrogen you're going to be allowed to discharge from the back end of your wastewater treatment facility for nitrogen. So you're talking about meeting a drinking water standard at the discharge of your wastewater plant for nitrogen. So we're taking a few steps here. We're not talking about just upgrading the lagoons and hitting the ammonia limit. We're talking about going through nitrification, denitrification, a few steps in order to meet that nitrate limit, and that's what made it pretty difficult to retrofit your lagoon system. So we put together a request for proposals and sent it out to a wide variety of manufacturers, and we received 12 responses, which is pretty good, for technologies ranging from sequencing batch reactors to activated sludge to lagoon retrofits, kind of everything under the sun. And really we just evaluated those technologies on their ability to meet the effluent limits, the capital costs, and operational costs. And the last thing I'll throw in there is the ability for that system to be permitted. I was speaking with Spencer last night about a potential algae solution. We've also been talking about an AST technology. There are loads and loads of innovative technologies out there for wastewater treatment. The issue is, unless that manufacturer has already gone through the process at the state to be an approved technology, our hands are kind of tied as a consultant. We can't get a permit for that technology to be used in a municipal application. So some of those technologies, although they sounded great in theory, without that alternative technology approval, it'd be very difficult to consider them a realistic alternative until they've navigated that process. When we boiled it down from those 12 RFP responses, it really came down to two different technologies. One is the sequencing batch reactor, and the other is a moving bed bioreactor. And we did our evaluation, our detailed evaluation on those two technologies, and really narrowed down on which one of those would be better, ultimately resulting in selecting a sequencing batch reactor, and it was really driven by costs. We spent some time, we toured actually a SBR and an NVBR with Town of Platteville staff and surrounding towns to get a feel for the technology, and ultimately it was decided to go with the SBR because we thought it would obviously meet the best capital costs, but also meet operation and maintenance needs. So when we use the term SBR, sequencing batch reactor, this is the type of treatment technology we're talking about. And really what it is you're combining numerous operations within a single tank. That's why it's so hard to beat on cost, is because instead of having numerous tanks doing different things, you only have one tank and you set up the controls for those numerous operations that all happen in the same tank. So this would be a good example of that. These are the same tank in different phases: the react phase, settle phase, and decant phase. So you would have this large concrete basin, you'd have raw wastewater flowing in, and this is an aeration grid. So we'd have blowers connected to this, and you're blowing air into this mixed wastewater sludge. We call it mixed liquor. That's called the react phase. That'll happen for a certain amount of time. Then what'll happen is you'll have a controller that will turn off the air. The air will turn off, and you will start to settle all the solids in the bottom of that tank. As you can see, you're starting to get some clarified effluent near the top. You keep on going, and eventually you have a sludge blanket in the bottom, and you have this nice clarified effluent on the top. You then go through the decant phase. In the decant phase, this is the decanter right here. You basically just use this as a skimmer in order to pull that clarified effluent off the top and go out to the next step in the treatment process. So the reason you see these used quite a bit in Colorado is that other technologies would have this be a tank and this be a separate tank, and so it drives up your cost. That's the efficiency of a sequencing batch reactor. It's a tried and true technology. Actually, the manufacturer that provided this proposal, they have 17 installations just in the state of Colorado. So that's not just SBRs, that's just this specific manufacturer. So I mean, there's a reason for that. It's a public process, and a lot of towns have been in this position before. I also think it's important to note that your treatment facility will not just be this process. We would refer to this as a secondary process. Your treatment facility would also include screening. So updates to how the raw wastewater is brought into the plant in order to screen out inert solids, which I know the town has looked at recently. Digestion of solids. You know, ultimately with all these solids in the bottom of the tank, you've got to do something with it. We would have an aerobic digester, so it would be a tank that you can blow air into in order to concentrate those solids, and ultimately those would get contract all the way. And then disinfection improvements. We are currently planning to switch from chlorination and dechlorination using chemicals to actually using a UV light in order to get that last disinfection step. This is a very preliminary site plan, but I like this because I think it gives you a good idea of the scale of the size we're talking about on your existing site. So as we were talking before, this is your influent pumping station. This is your Lagoon 1, Lagoon 2, constructed wetlands, disinfection, and then you go out to the river. This right here is the footprint of the new mechanical facility. So it's much, much smaller than what we would see for lagoons, and we certainly do have the real estate in order to fit that on this site. Another thing is that in that 2010 utility plan, there was a focus on potentially moving the location of the wastewater treatment facility. And in this, we are planning on keeping it on this site. So the opinion of cost for capital costs is $5.5 million, with a 20-year operation maintenance cost of about $5 million as well. So we have recently designed and bid and built one of these for a rural community on the western slope. So we had a good estimate on the capital cost from that, which was useful. But as was mentioned earlier, you know, prices, it's an expensive time to build, but there's also certain ways that that can be managed. This is a little bit of a tangent, but I do think it's worth mentioning. There's different delivery methods for projects. Most people are familiar with design, bid, build. You go through the design process, you bid the project, and then you build it. Another process that we're seeing that's really common, particularly for water and wastewater infrastructure in Colorado, is called CMAR, Construction Manager at Risk. And what that is you bring a contractor to the table much earlier than when the design is 100% complete. It'd be common to bring a contractor into the design process at 30 to 60% design, and then you get real-time feedback on pricing. That really allows for value engineering, and we've seen that be really successful for a lot of municipalities that are in your same spot. We're definitely going to recommend you going through that process, but that's further down the line. But it's just something to know. It kind of avoids that, okay, well, you have an estimate, and then you wait a year and a half in order to know if you were on bid day. You can kind of manage that throughout the design process, which I think is pretty effective and results in cost savings. The schedule for this project is to complete the engineering in 2019, build the infrastructure in 2020, and have it operational in 2021. So we're trying to beat that compliance schedule by roughly a year.
Simon, of that opinion of capital cost of the $5.5 million, what would you say would be the reserve or the contingencies to that number?
It's a 20% contingency.
Okay.
And then what you'll see is we'll drop the contingency as we continue in the design. Yeah.
When you get the actual cost?
Exactly. Yep. So I mean, once we're at say 60% design, then we'll probably have a 15% contingency. Once we're at 90% design, we'll have 10% contingency because we've made the decisions and really narrowed down exactly what we're trying to do.
Okay.
So the next steps, a really obvious one is we need to get some feedback from the board and submit this wastewater utility plan to the North Front Range Water Quality Planning Association in order to update the planning document. Other than that, we're pursuing a funding package, and we're pursuing that from kind of any and all funding agencies that are willing to work with the town and help with grants and loans. The three most common for water wastewater are CDPHE grants and loans state revolving fund. So we use the term SRF, that's for the state revolving fund. What that is that is federal money coming from the EPA, coming down to the state, and then getting disseminated from the state out to local communities. CDPHE grants, they can be a grant or a loan. The idea of the loan aspect is that you're able to beat the market rate, and that's specific to water and wastewater and enterprise funds. Another one is DOLA, which I know you're familiar with. DOLA, partially paid for this study, and I've also seen the senior center that I believe was partially paid for with the Energy and Mineral Impact Grant. Energy and mineral impact is one of the top grant aspects of water wastewater infrastructure in the state of Colorado. Obviously, a significant energy and mineral impact for this community, so that's something that we're going to pursue very heavily. I also wanted to mention the USDA. USDA has a unique program for communities that are less than 10,000 people. It's called Rural Development. And they have a pretty strong water wastewater program, and it can be a combination of grants and loans. So we've seen communities get up to a 70% grant for wastewater infrastructure. I want to be very careful, we're not promising that anyways, because also seen communities get zero. It really depends on median household income and also the timing of your application. But we've reached out to the USDA and we're kind of going with the full approach of let's talk to anyone who's willing to talk to us and try to secure as many grants and loans as we can. So the town has released JVA to kind of formally start this process. So we are currently working on what's called a pre-qualification form. Really what it is it's just a form to say whether the current finances are, what the capital cost of the project is, and then it'll set us up for a meeting. And at that meeting, we plan to have these three funding agencies where we can start to refine these conversations and come up with the most attractive funding package possible. And with that, I'll hand it over to Brian.
Thank you, Simon. Evening, everyone. Unfortunately, I have the less enviable task of talking about what this will end up doing to rates and how we pay for this project. We're with Raftellus. We're financial consultants for the utility industry. So we provide financial consulting generally to water, wastewater, and stormwater funds. The wastewater fund is an enterprise fund, so it operates more like a business than the general fund of the municipal government. That means you're taking in user revenues, those who are using the sewer system, and using that to pay the expenses of the sewer system. So we've come up with a financial plan for the sewer fund today. First, unfortunately, I have to get a little bit of legalese out of the way. I need to let you know, according to the federal government, that we are a registered municipal advisor, which means that there are also rules and regulations which we follow. The federal government has decided what constitutes advice, and that unless we agree beforehand what I'm talking about today, it doesn't count as advice. And with that little bit of silliness over, let's get into the financial plan. And let me just mention to you off from the start, if you have any questions, if you need some clarification, feel free to interrupt and ask questions as we go along. There's going to be a lot of discussion, I think, at the end in terms of making some decisions. But I want to keep everyone on the same page as we do. So we come up with a financial plan. There are kind of two parts. We're looking at first costs and then revenues. We're going to project the wastewater utilities expenses from 2018 through 2023. So we've got kind of 5 years out into the future. Now those costs kind of break down into three categories. There's your operating costs, or O&M, your capital costs, and then your debt service. Debt service is a fancy way of saying whatever loans, annual loan amounts you're paying. And then we're going to project the utilities rate revenues under your existing rates. And we look at those costs, we look at those revenues, and we will propose annual rate revenue adjustments, which is percentage increase, such that we fund those costs, our O&M, our cash funded capital, our annual debt service. And then we're going to try to meet exceed two different criteria. We're going to exceed our debt service coverage ratio requirements. That's a mouthful, and I'll explain what that is on the next slide. And our cash reserve targets. So, debt service coverage ratio, what is that? Let's ignore that little equation up there. Basically what debt service coverage means is that when someone loans you money, they want to know that, let's start with what the state revolving fund is. They're going to require the town to maintain a minimum DSC ratio of 110%. That means when they look at your revenues coming in, after you've paid off your operating expenses, they want to make sure you're getting in $1.10 of revenue for every dollar of debt service you're paying that year. So we're going to set a target for the town of 130%. So that when, after you pay your debt service, and every dollar debt service, you bring in $1.30 of revenue. To do a simple hypothetical example, if you had a sewer fund, sewer utility that was spending $500 in O&M and had $100 of debt service every year, that would mean it needs to bring in at least $630 of revenue to meet debt service requirements. And that's just a way of a lender making sure that they are able to get paid each year. The next component that we're going to look at are the cash reserves targets. This SRF fund, those loans are going to attach an operating reserve requirement equal to 25% of your annual O&M costs. Sometimes that might be, it's called the 90-day operating reserve. Same thing. We're also going to recommend that the town maintain a capital reserve target through this financial plan. Starting in 2019, $100,000, it'll go up to $300,000 in 2020 and later. Now there's several reasons for doing this. One, you're spending a lot of money. There's a little bit of uncertainty in terms of how much the final project cost will be. But we also don't have a lot of capital spending planned for things such as sewer rehab. So if in the next 5 years there's something that needs to be built or repaired, immediately you're going to have some money on hand to tap into should that need arise. It's just a conservative planning step to take with this. We're going to have to make some assumptions as we go into our financial plan. Now, Simon talked about assuming a growth rate through the 20-year period, and that's fine for planning for wastewater flows. But from a financial standpoint, we're going to assume that there's no growth during the planning period. There are a couple reasons for that. But this means that there's not going to be any system investment charge revenue coming in, and that there's not going to be rate revenue coming in from these new customers. The reason for making this assumption is that the growth for new taps on the sewer fund has just been very low and sporadic. And we don't want to count on that happening when in fact it might not. We're also going to assume that the billed sewer usage is going to decline 1% annually starting in 2019. There's a lot of older homes here in the community, and as people replace old toilets with more efficient ones or new shower heads, it's just, again, a conservative estimate to be making, and it's kind of borne out in some of the flow data that I've seen in terms of billed usage. We're going to assume that annual inflation is 3% per year, so when we're looking at costs a few years down the road, we're inflating them on a conservative basis. As Simon mentioned, we're going to assume that design engineering happens in 2019, construction in 2020, and the plant comes online in 2021. There are going to be increased O&M costs with the new plant, and we're going to assume that those begin in 2021. As for the borrowing terms, we're assuming a state revolving fund loan, or an SRF loan, with a 3.5% interest rate for a period of 30 years. And we're also going to assume that the first payment will occur in 2020, but usually that's basically half of an annual payment. So it won't be the full annual payment in 2020. What's driving this financial plan and for the rate increases that we're going to be talking about on the next slide is the capital improvement plan, which is really surrounding the new wastewater treatment plant. You see in 2018, this little blue sliver here, this is the planned capital spending for this year. It's almost nothing. The rest of the capital spending in the 5-year plan is the design and engineering. And this bar here is the construction of the plant. The orange portion is the portion that will be funded by loans. Depending on what rate increase scenario the town chooses, that will justify a little bit one way or the other, but it's roughly accurate. So I'm going to present 2 different rate increase scenarios here today. There's going to be a level approach that we can take, which we have a 22% increase this year for 2019, 2020, and 2021. So level rate increases for 3 years. And then we have 2% rate increases in 2022 and 2023. Those are kind of inflationary rate increases. Alternatively, you could take the approach to just kind of get the bulk of the work and paying over with, and have a front-loaded approach, in which you have a 53% rate increase in 2019, and a 14% rate increase in 2020, before dropping down to the inflationary 2% annual rate increases. I mentioned we look at the cash reserves at the end of the year, and also debt service coverage. So I'm going to present each of those in turn. First, we'll look at the unrestricted end-of-year cash. You see, between these two scenarios, the level rate increases and the front-loaded, it's pretty much the same financial plan. Well, it's in 2018 in the same place. In 2019, the front-loaded will have a little more cash on hand because you've raised rates more. And in 2020, what ends up happening is with the front-loaded rate increase, you cash fund a little bit more, and so the debt that you issue is a little bit less. And in terms of your cash reserves, they're pretty much equivalent between the two plans for those 5 years. We look at the debt service coverage ratio. In 2019, it's 0 because you don't have any loans. There's no debt service coverage to calculate. In 2020, you've got a very high, very healthy debt service coverage ratio. It's because you don't have the new, the higher O&M costs yet. From when the new plant starts, you're only paying a half payment that year. And in 2021 through 2023, with those 2% rate increases, you're right at your target there. We're right where we want to be.
At 130%.
Yeah, at 130%, right. So the legal requirement with SRF loan is this gray bar here at 110%, and the red bar is the target of 130%. We look at a typical monthly bill for a residential customer that's being billed for 5,000 gallons of usage each year. Currently, in 2018, you're around $37. So we look at the level rate increases. Next year that would go to 45, 2020 to 55, and then up to $68 in 2021. If you front load it, that same billed quantity go to $57 in 19, 65 in 20, and 21, 66. So what you see is the remainder of the financial plan, about $1 or $2 less every month, because you'll remember with the front-loaded plan, you take out less debt, so you don't have as much debt service you're having to cover.
Now, Brian, that's base rate and sewer usage.
That's base rate and sewer usage. These are across-the-board rates, so I think about $24 per month is the base rate. That would be increased 22%, as well as the volume rates would go up 22%, or 53% for the other approach. Now those are just the user rate revenues. Also want to mention that we've been taking a look at the system investment charges. These are one-time fees paid by new customers who tap into the system. And in our business, oftentimes we hear the expression, we want growth to pay for growth. So this is basically a new customer buying into the system, paying back the existing customers for the investments they've made into the system. So we calculated essentially a value for the new system that will be used to serve new customers in the future. We calculated a number of EQRs, that's equivalent residential meters, that could be served by the new system under existing flow rates. So you take the dollar amount, the value, divided by your capacity, and that gives you your value per EQR of $2,993. Your current wastewater SIC is $1,439. Now this is just for your treatment assets. This is the treatment component of the SIC. So waiting on getting some fixed asset data, so for your collection system, when we include the value of that, don't hold me to this, but I think it's going to be add another $1,000 or so, roughly, to this full SIC. But should you have new customers coming in, they should be paying for the cost of joining the system. And then finally, I want to end on a little bit of a hopeful note. Simon talked about the potential for grants, and that's very much out in the future. It's unknown to what extent extent the town may be eligible. But should the town be able to get a $1 million grant associated with the construction of the plant, if we go with a level rate increases of 22% each year, instead of 22% in 21, that would drop down to 12%. And for the front load, instead of, we go 53%, instead of 14%, that would drop down to 5%. But we're too early in the process to count on chickens that haven't hatched at this point. So we want to present the realistic, the numbers that we're most confident in. So with that, that's the meat of my presentation. I think the discussion now will probably focus on what sort of rate increase approach to make. I'm happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Real quick, going back to the DOLA grant. The 1 million is the maximum match for DOLA. The DOLA, as we went through tier 2 low application for the senior center, they may not give us a full million, but they may give us 700,000 or $500,000 or whatever.
Right.
So that may fluctuate.
And
They want to spread the money out to everybody.
And there's enough uncertainty. You've got that 20% contingency built in.
Yes.
Maybe you don't need it. Maybe you get a chunk of grant money. You end up landing, in a more pleasant place than what I presented initially. So we're going with the numbers that we're confident of now.
And on the design engineering for 2019, CDPHE has a grant process that we may qualify for up to 300,000.
Correct.
Yeah.
So that'll stem from that meeting that you're setting up, pre-qual.
That's correct.
Okay.
Yeah, we'll have to see if the town can qualify as a disadvantaged community. The initial metrics, it's uncertain, but during that meeting, DOLA and SRF will provide more information on that.
Do either of you gentlemen have your presentations in hard copy format?
I did not bring it in hard copy. I can get you a hard copy though, if you like.
That would be wonderful. 405 Division,
405 Division.
Lynn Taylor.
I'll give Lynn my copy.
Thank you so
There
much.
you go, Lynn.
I appreciate it.
You're welcome. If anyone else wants a coffee, I can make a coffee.
Brian, I have a question about some of your assumptions. Number one is the 3% inflation rate for years off in the future. I'd like to see it at 3% as well, but I suspect that might turn out to be a little low.
Usually, in the past, it's actually a pretty conservative estimate. I think inflation's been ticking up, and you're absolutely right about that. So if you start assuming it to be higher than that, costs get out of hand pretty quickly. That compound interest gets
I'm certain,
yeah.
but there's a certain sense of reality I'd like to stay in touch with too. As far as, who knows what inflation is likely to be 3 years out from now.
Yeah, 3% is the standard that we've been using for a while.
Okay.
And you're absolutely right. Who knows what's going to happen around the corner? The Fed targets about 2% inflation, so we feel that we're being conservative with the estimate, but we can always be wrong. The nice thing is that there's only a 5-year financial plan, so you can't go too far off the tracks in that period of time. But if we were to assume a higher inflation rate, that would end up, suggesting even higher rate increases early on.
Another exercise I put myself through today was I took your loan amount and kept 3.5% loan rate, but reduced the term to 20 years.
Yeah.
Because it seems to me that a capital improvement that for the most part has a lifespan of 20 years, although we know that it's going to be there longer, but the maintenance goes up as well. To bring the payment in line with the 20 years, I came up with an interesting number, I thought. It would increase the payment by $6.40 a month per tap. 941 taps, $6.40 a month, to make the additional $72,000 monthly payment, which cuts off 10 years of interest payment, because it pays for it in 20 years, which is a result. I don't want to bore you with the numbers, but I'm a number cruncher, and there was a savings of $1,134,000 as compared to a 30-year payout.
Yeah, you end up paying obviously more over a 30-year loan than you would toward
This is
in
refinancing
interest.
your house.
Right. But the question is, but you're also going to end up having higher rates in the intervening in those 20 years,
Understood.
obviously. And you're also going to have that issue with the debt service coverage. So yeah, so
Okay.
it kind of compounds itself.
Mhm.
So I'm just going to make up numbers here.
Sure.
If you're paying $1 million a year in debt service over a 30-year period, that means you got to bring in $1.3 million above your operating costs. You go up to $1.5 million for, let's say you reduce your term to 20 years, and now you've got a $1.5 million annual payment. That means you've got to bring in $1.95 million above your operating costs. So these numbers, you do end up saving money on the interest in the long term.
Right.
But in terms of your bills in the immediate years, we are looking for affordability for customers as kind of a priority. We know these are really big numbers for the town.
Oh, yeah, and a lot of them are still pretty fluid because the grants and so on haven't
Absolutely.
even been finalized or even applied for in
Yeah,
some sense.
and you're right, 20 years is usually the basis, or the standard loan term that we see most often. And in this case, it sounds like we have the 30-year option available, and I think in terms of trying to maintain affordability for residents is probably the best way to go.
Okay.
Another way to think of it too, if you're looking to minimize what those costs are, you can pay that same debt service for 30 years each year, but inflation goes up each year. So the real cost in year 28 is a lot less than
That's
what it
true.
will be now.
That's true.
Yeah.
Sure. I just, my first inkling, or my first instinct was to, in the same way I don't wanna take out an 8-year car loan and drive it to the junkyard 4 years later. I'm underwater from the time I drive it off the lot.
Right.
So why do I wanna finance a 20-year capital project over 30 years?
Understood.
Which is, I mean, almost, for me, it was almost a knee-jerk reaction to seeing a 30-year finance.
Yeah.
But, cause that all could change with the amount of the grants that come in.
No,
as well.
it's, and we're also making a conservative estimate on the loan terms with 3.5%. I think there's a good chance it could be lower than that, and that could
Sure.
be as valuable as a grant.
But these numbers really, those decisions are, as far as the board is concerned, are out in the future at some point. In 2019 at least.
Yeah.
And during this next year, we'll find a lot more about the financing part. The dole application, for example, meeting with Don Sandoval and discussing with him the timing of the application, what cycle to see if we can secure that grant, hopefully the full $1 million with our $1 million match. Say, for example, instead of 5.5, the hard numbers come back at 5 million. I use that for simple math. We get that $1 million match, we've already paid, we've already got the funding for 2 million. So we go into debt obligation for 3. And with talking to Liz Hunt at CDPHE, if we can become a disadvantaged community, which is not a great term, but that's reality, based upon median household income, unemployment rate, and other factors, we could get a direct obligation loan at 0%, potentially, or 1%, or 2%. But those factors we just won't know yet until we meet with them and make that qualification, or that pre-application.
You got it.
At least that's my goal, the less long-term debt obligation if we can get those grants.
So if we get those grants and then we can
bring down those, rates sooner than waiting out that third or fourth year, right?
Yeah, I think the way I set these rate increases up, particularly on the front-loaded one, it still, right now, calls for that 14% rate increase in the second year, right? That's kind of your wiggle room, right there. I think that 53% probably going to be pretty close to necessary, almost under any scenario.
With or without the grant?
Yeah, you know, if you're looking for pros and cons of the two rate increase approaches, you know, there's less of a shock to the system with the level one. The front-loaded one, you're gonna put yourself in a better position and give yourself a little bit more options, depending on, you know, where some of these costs land. You'll be cash funding a bit more of whatever the project does end up costing. It's not a huge difference in the loan amount. I think it's, you know, 250,000 overall, but
It's still a lot of money.
yeah, it's not much.
Brian, I have a question. The debt service coverage, you talked about having 30% additional on that, and 10% is a requirement. So,
Right.
first off, why have the extra 20%? Part of the reason you explained is for operating costs of like a sewer or something else in the system goes bad. But don't we already have money coming in the rates to cover something like that currently?
So there's two different targets that I talked about. There's the cash reserves and the debt service coverage. One of them, the cash reserves, that's kind of just a stock. That's just a quantity, right? The debt service coverage is more of a rate, is how quickly is money coming into the sewer fund. And the reason why we set a target higher than the legal minimum is because there's uncertainty about what that DSC ratio is going to be from year to year. We talked about the estimates we're making on the capital costs of the plant, for instance, but there are also estimates we're making on the operating costs of the plant. They end up being a little bit higher. That ends up dropping your DSC ratio pretty quickly. Alternatively, if you guys have reduced billed sewer, so people get more efficient a little quicker than we're expecting, that would drop your DSC ratio. So we're trying to keep you away from a legal minimum, because if you drop below that legal minimum, bad things can happen. They put those covenants into the loan documents for a reason, and there are usually consequences to that if they're paying attention. So we're just trying to give you a little bit of wiggle room there. It turns out if you set it down to 1.2, you don't end up saving a whole lot on your rate increases in the long term. You could probably skip those last 2 years of 2% rate increases and end up landing at about 1.2 on your debt service coverage.
So if the town wants to adjust what they're making for payments each month and decrease their water or decrease their usage, is that gonna impact the amount
Well,
that you guys estimate to come in then?
So your sewer bills are calculated based on something called an average winter consumption. You just take a couple of months in the winter time, January through March, I think.
I think so.
Yeah, so you average those 3 months, and a lot of communities, this is very common for wastewater bills. You use a couple months in the winter time, you average those together, and that's what's assumed to be your indoor consumption that you use pretty much throughout the year, because you don't shower or flush the toilet much more in the summer than you do in the winter time. Because what you want to do is you want to exclude water that gets used outside to like water your grass. That's not going to flow back into the sewer system. You just want to charge people for what's going into the sewer system and people that are using the sewer system. So that is the nice thing
So
about.
it's a pretty solid number you have.
Yeah.
For using that average.
Exactly, and like I said, we're assuming that there's a little bit of conservation going on moving forward as people get new toilets, new shower heads. That, like I said, from the billing data I've seen and a few other bits of data, it seems to be true for Platteville. So we think it's a good estimate.
about that SPR system that Simon and I talked about with everybody in the group we met previously. It's an expandable system. And Brian had mentioned earlier about the current investment fee for sewer being $1,439. The $29.93 proposal, but you still have to factor in the capital cost of that.
Well, so it is the capital cost of the treatment, but we're not including
the system.
the collection system, right?
How long would that take to calculate?
If I can get the fixed asset data, a couple days.
Okay.
Yeah.
And at our next regular meeting on January 15th, I'm proposing to the board to increase our investment fees for both water and wastewater. The raw water supply plant on the water side, our current rate is $1,294, and based upon that raw water study that was completed by Solar Resources, they're proposing it should be $3,300. So I wanted to do both. So we can't forget about our water treatment facility as well, our sewer dealings and water coming in. So both of those will come to the board on the 15th of January to increase. So for new growth, the concept, as Simon pointed out, we're not even using half the capacity of sewer again. You look at our comp plans, recent discussion, we don't have anybody being down our door to build a 2,000 home subdivision in the next few years. It's just not there. If someone came in tomorrow, it'd still take a year, if not 2 years, to go through that planning process, to get all the infrastructure in. So that new growth with the new investment fees being paid would help offset those costs. Plus, you as a board, you have control, because on that annexation, you do your annexation agreement, but you can ask for anything. Number one, you'll say, if you're building all these rooftops, say 1,000 rooftops, for the code, you will have to pay the equivalency for all these system investment fees. Plus, you can also say that this doesn't offset the cost of the new expansion, you can require that developer to pay that amount. So the existing citizens do not get burdened with that. So those are options that you have in the future. Because a part of this whole thing that we talked about is going with the SPR versus the NVBR, is that the other system costs about $1 million more. The long-term operation and maintenance really was a wash. Both systems have about the same number. So why pay $1 million more per system where the SPR will work for us, plus it's expandable? And we only want the citizens to know that this is a requirement for the community as it is now. They're not paying for future growth. They're replacing what they have now in this community. So I just wanted to add that too.
How do our rates compare to other municipalities?
There's a huge amount of variability depending on size of the community, who's treating it, where they are in the cycle. There are other communities, that have old treatment systems, kind of like the lagoons, that don't cost a lot to operate, that are having to switch over. I think that pretty much every community or small community in Colorado I've worked with recently have been talking about new wastewater regulations driving future capital. And so, right now I'd say they're probably a little bit on the low side compared to other communities. But even these increased rates, you're going to have others that are in the same boat as you. It just kind of depends on where people are in their capital replacement cycle and what sort of technologies they're using. So, not wildly out of line in either direction.
Troy, if I may, living in Loveland, it's a much larger community and that kind of thing, so they've got quite an economy of scale, but I still pay between $40 and $50 a month on my wastewater side. So.
Any questions?
I do have something. So Simon brought it up briefly. There's a technology that I spoke with the doctor who kind of came up with this yesterday and today. David spoke with him as well. The company is called Grosswen Technologies. I heard about it on NPR last week and figured I'd give them a call because we were in a wastewater predicament. They use an algal rotating reactor. Essentially it runs algae through the wastewater before it goes into the lagoon. And based on his numbers, it can treat nitrates, phosphorus, and ammonia pretty well. I essentially gave him the utility plan, told him what the discharge numbers would be, and they made it sound like it wouldn't be anything for his system to take care of those issues. It's a preliminary cost estimate from the gentleman who, the company is $3.5 million to install it, and operating costs are $24,000 a year. So it's significant savings for the town as it were to pan out. The issues are, it's not approved in Colorado as an alternate technology currently, but it is approved in Iowa for wastewater treatment. And Iowa has a similar colder climate as we do, so the gentleman, Dr. Martin Gross, is confident, maybe overly confident, that he could get the approval for Colorado. Also, it could potentially limit our growth. The algal reactor is almost like the SBR, where it's a cellular modular thing that can be added on if there was a growth potential. The lagoon would be the limiting factor, but we are at 50% capacity, so there is some room to grow in the lagoon currently. What I'm asking the board to consider, if you guys would do this, is Dr. Martin Gross will move quickly, if I call him tonight and let him know tomorrow, to attempt to get a alternate technology approval from the state of Colorado. And I would say we would reconvene in a month and see what his progress is at. If he has none, forget about it. But that's what I'm asking you guys to do, because I do think it could save the town a ton of money, put us in a green sort of situation where the algal, you actually harvest the algae off of the reactor when it's done, and that can be sold for either like a fertilizer or produced for biofuels. So the estimates based on what our stuff is coming in, he estimated that we would get $9,000 a year just from the sale of the byproduct. So that would take your operation costs down to $15,000 a year for the system. Now you still have the costs of operating the lagoon on top of that. So whatever we're paying now wouldn't change, because it just has to be $15,000 number we should do that. I know this is late in the game, and I didn't do this on purpose, but I would love if you guys would appease me on that, and we could just give him a little bit of time to see if they can do that.
What would that do with our grants applications?
Well, I believe if it was approved through the state of Colorado, it would qualify, DOLA would still consider it a qualified operation if it went to that process. Actually Kevin Tone, Simon's boss, so to speak, from JVA came in, and David and I was chatting with him just about the conversation that Spencer brought up, and we're always open to new, we focus on what's already approved because of the schedule we're on. But I know it'll take several months to get through the pre-qual application. We do need to tell CDPHE which route we're going at some point, probably sooner than later. Is that fair to say, Simon?
Yeah, I can talk to that specifically, and when in the process you have to make that decision. So right now it's, you're essentially setting up the funding. So the selected alternative could change. People want to know what the selected alternative is and what your cost estimate is. We go down to the design process and you find a different selected alternative that has a lower cost. You still have the flexibility to make that change until you've actually gone through the early stages of the engineering approval process, where you're spending engineering dollars and you're getting formal approval letters from the state, basically buying off on your design calculations for different steps in the process. And that's broken down into 3 phases. There's the site application phase, the process design report phase, and the full design and specs phase. You can, once you get into process design, which is when you're at about 30%, that's when you're at the point where you really can't change the selected alternative. But it could happen now, You know, you always gotta be open to, if you can find a way to do it cheaper, you wanna keep that option available as long as you can. It's really just when you start going through the formal engineering process.
And that $3.5 million quote I gave, that's with the $500,000 quote that JVA gave to reline the lagoons. So it's $3 million for the gross fund technology system and $500,000 for the relining, which I may be a low estimate.
So the footprint would still be the same, so lagoons would not go away, okay?
So real quick, Simon, speaking to that, I did not go back and dig through on the estimate that JVA had in there, just the number that we had for the relining as a comparison. Was that just for the lining material itself, or was that for the entire process of emptying a lagoon, cleaning a lagoon, adding the new liner, and then refilling?
It's just for the lining portion, so, we have another $500,000, I believe, in dealing with the biosolids that are currently in the lagoon.
Okay.
But you have to remove, line.
So relining the lagoons actually is a $1 million process.
Does that have to be done? What's the requirement? Who's driving that says that has to be relined?
Sure. So it's basically in the design criteria for wastewater treatment facilities to saying the seepage rate that's allowable in lagoons, and it's really low. We've done seepage studies before, and it's very hard to prove that a clay-lined lagoon can meet that low rate. If you look at the data, you know, when you're losing 50%, there's really no need to do a seepage study. You know that's happening. It hasn't showed up on the state's radar yet, to be totally honest with you. They haven't given you a compliance schedule that says you need to reline your lagoons, and I've seen that for a lot of other towns. Specifically, why they've missed that in your facility and why they've caught it for others, I don't know why. But I can tell you that I'm working with more than 3 communities right now that are dealing with a compliance schedule specific to relining lagoons, because that came up during a sanitary survey.
Still, that could be a $4 million option instead of 5.5.
Right.
And, you know, to the points that were made, alternative technology approval. Once you have that, you can be shown as equivalent to other technologies. Until then, it's, well, you can kind of say whatever you want to do in a lab, but if you don't have the safety factors built in by the state of how it actually get approved, then we just can't give it a meaningful comparison. So I agree, if they're willing to pursue an alternative technology, we'll certainly help you look at that. It's just that for us, until the manufacturer has that, it's near impossible. We've worked with manufacturers before, for other small communities that want to come in, they have technologies that are great for retrofitting lagoons. Some have been successful in getting alternative technology, some haven't. So the last thing we want to do is tell a town, all right, this is the good technology, we're going to save a bunch of money, and then not be able to get a permit a year later, we have a compliance schedule.
And that's not my goal here. If Martin Gross doesn't move quick and the state of Colorado doesn't act like they want to play with him, it's not going to happen.
But he can still pursue whatever he chooses with the state. It's not gonna.
It won't happen in Platteville, is what I'm saying. It wouldn't happen in Platteville, I guess is what I'm saying. Yes, he can pursue whatever he'd like.
Well, I mean, and whatever the state's time schedule is in responding to him may or may not be resolved before we need to actually make a hard decision on the technology that we're gonna use.
Sure.
I mean, so, as far as appeasing you, I would tell you to call him and have him do whatever he wants. But there's no promises being made at this end. I mean, but there's no promises from the state that it's gonna get approved either.
No.
It may get done before we need to make a decision.
It was my understanding that we would be making a decision to approve the wastewater utility plan as it stands, which would send us into down the road of the SPR for sure.
You're approving a plan based upon the best known practices that the state of Colorado has today. Like Simon says, 6 months from now, this gentleman gets his approval, you can amend that. This isn't concrete by any means, Just like the rates are assumptions, the amount is assumption. You know, I'm hoping that 700,000 roughly contingency gets knocked down to 200,000. I don't know. Keep that below 5 million. But what you approved tonight does not say in stone that we cannot change this by any means. This is the best solution at the time until something else comes forward. But I respect that, I think that's a good idea.
And I definitely agree with you that, yeah, we're only $1 million off on the reline we're doing for $1 million, we're probably $1 million off in the, but the operating cost, we would save
Exactly,
multiple
that's-
$1 million in that. I mean, we're looking at $80,000 a year just in electricity.
Yeah.
Exactly, and that's a tremendous savings if, this will be factors, I
Oh,
know
sure.
this is all within 48 hours, obviously, but, you know, where does the company that builds these facilities come from, are they close by, what's their mob fees, can they get Colorado permitting, there's a lot of factors involved, obviously, not just getting the CDPHE exceptions. But yeah, let's move down that road, might as well, there's nothing to lose.
I just want to give Troy, that this is a plain level document. By no way are you saying SBR, no other treatment technology. You're saying this is our proposed design flow, this is our proposed technology, and this is our proposed budget. Let's take it to the next step.
And Simon, if you can help me speak to this, because I know you're a little more familiar with it. We are somewhere between the 40 and 45% of hydraulic capacity, but we're a little higher than that on our loadings. On the organic capacity at the lagoon, we're a little closer to the 50%. And the state looks at both of those levels, is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. And then the next, so even if we were able to go with this technology, a different type of technology that still used the lagoons, say we're at 50% between organic and hydraulic, that would give us a 30% window for growth before we have to go into the planning stage. Because at 80% is when the state requires that you, so it's not like we get to play with the full 50% number that we're lower than right now. At 80%, the state says thou shalt start planning because you've reached this point. And at 95%, you have to be under construction for your improvements. Expansion or improvements or whatever is gonna happen to increase that capacity. So I just wanted to make sure that when we're saying we're at somewhere between 40 and 50% capacity, we don't have another 40 to 50%. We've got, approximately 30% before we have to start moving towards something else. And as I was speaking with Spencer earlier today, my crystal ball is broken. I don't have any idea whether we're gonna hit that growth rate in 24 months or 24 years, before we would see that kind of increase in the flow.
Simon, I apologize. You might be able to elaborate a little further. What is the capability of expanding the lagoon system? Let's say we did want growth.
Yep.
We did go with this technology. Is there a feasibility to do such a thing?
Lagoon systems can certainly be expanded. Really what it comes down to is you're looking at the ability to meet nutrient limits. Actually, JVA put together, we were hired by the State Health Department Engineering Section to put together a guidance document on the ability of lagoon systems to meet ammonia limits in Colorado for rural communities. And so we put together a matrix, and the issue is that since you have such long hydraulic retention times, your temperatures drop so low, the microorganism that's responsible for nitrification, they just slow down at cold temperatures. So it becomes a game of trying to keep enough heat over a large area that makes it very difficult to meet those nutrient limits.
But with this system, you're removing the nitrogen before it even gets into the lagoon. It comes through, as soon as it comes in, before it even comes into the lagoon, it passes through this reactor.
Yeah, so you're talking about typical wastewater treatment, you'll go through oxidation of ammonia, right? You'll oxidize ammonia, you go to nitrate, reduce nitrate, you go to nitrogen gas, which is what we're breathing right now. That's conventional wastewater treatment for nitrogen. In an algae situation, you're bypassing that process. You're using algae in order to use the nitrogen without oxidizing it, in order to basically build it into the cellular structure of the algae. So it's a fundamentally different process. I can say that at a high level, what we're seeing in the wastewater industry is that wastewater plants can be designed in order to be net positive energy and nutrients. The technologies are just catching up. So it will take a lot of time to get there, but we're starting to see those types of technologies enter the arena, mostly in Europe right now. So this is, there's another company that's doing a similar thing. They're called Clear As. They do algae ball reactors, right? Very same thing. The very first installation is going in Utah right now in North America. I would say they're a little bit ahead of this company. This company's a little more startup, but same concept, right? How do we kind of bypass the high energy aspect of it and try to create a useful biofuel such as algae? It's just not quite there in the mainstream yet to the point where we can say we can get you a permit for this.
Simon, going along that same line, what are right now our lagoon where it's at is kind of grandfathered, for lack of a better term. But as far as expansion, we would have to meet the new criteria for residential and the setbacks and all that too. Is that correct?
Yep. Really what that would end up looking like is that in order to get the microbes to be able to meet these lower standards, we have to do what we call intensification of the process. So you would still have your lagoon, but then you would have like a mini bioreactor afterwards where you could concentrate those microbes, control the temperature, control their food source in order to meet these low limits. So we did receive proposals for that. There's a company that specializes in advanced lagoon systems called Lemma Technologies out of Minnesota. They do all kinds of cold weather applications for lagoons. We got a proposal from that. We reviewed it as a team. And it just became, okay, well, now you still have this large lagoon and all the complexity of an SBR and other mechanical facilities kind of spread throughout. It just didn't pass the logic test, and it wasn't beneficial from a capital or an O&M perspective, so it got thrown out. But ultimately, when you try to meet these really low limits with lagoons, you get pushed to the fact that you have to be able to control the environment of the microbes more than a lagoon can, so you end up tacking on ancillary processes before and afterwards.
Until you start wanting hard about this.
That's why I was elected.
There you go.
Anything else? I can entertain a motion.
We make a motion to approve the wastewater utility plant update, including the wastewater financial plan as presented.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Can I have roll call, please, Mayor?
Harold Leggett,
Yes.
Nick Ralston,
Aye.
Spencer Bradnan,
Yes.
Troy Blum,
Aye.
Hope Morris,
Yes.
Larry Clark.
All right.
Alright. Moving forward, we'll go to reports. Thank you guys so much
Thank
for
you,
coming
Jennifer.
in and all of your time.
Thank you. Sounds good. Have a nice evening.
Thank you as well.
What you have in your package primarily the updated plan. The entire plan also involves the comprehensive plan update. That's another documents. It's a large electronic file, so if anybody wants to take this home, yes, leave it on. This has the entire plan. What you have is the meat bucket. It's the actual plan update, but I didn't think you wanted another copy of the comp plan or the long document of the permit terms. It's 7 pages just about Greek that I don't read, so that's why I asked these guys, just so you know. We'll have this on file in office.
Thank you. Okay, so, police report, Mr. Lincoln?
Just written only. I didn't think Carl would sit for wastewater discussion tonight, and if you have any questions, please just give him a call direct. He said he told any questions that you may have.
Okay. Movies?
Sorry. The interceptor turned out well?
Yep, came in well. Tony got back late, that night, no issues. Carl's talking to wireless right now about getting a confirmed number to equip it if we need it.
Alright, moving on to Public Works, Mr. Brent.
Thank you, Mrs. Mayor. I got you a printed copy that was laid on the table there this evening of my report. My alarm didn't go off until this afternoon to get it done for next week's meeting, forgetting that we moved the meeting up, so I do apologize that it wasn't in the packet. I don't really have anything else to add. We did, as you can see in the color pictures, we had a significant water leak right out here on Grand Avenue. It never surfaced, never came to the top of the road, so we're not 100% sure exactly how long that leak ran. It worked its way right into the storm drains, and so it went straight to the plains out by the river. But we were able to get that taken care of. That was the biggest significant. And then under miscellaneous, the first bullet point there, Public Works staff just wants the board to know that they appreciate the Christmas party and the Christmas cards and the salary increase for next year. So if there's any questions, I'd be happy to entertain them and see if I can answer them.
You tell them the evaluation done yet.
I wasn't very well, that was about.
Just kidding.
David, the Apollo Solutions audit that happened?
Yes.
You haven't received any feedback from that yet, have you?
No, we have not. They, honestly, Tara didn't give me a time frame. I was under the impression that somewhere between 3 and 5 weeks that we'd hear back from them after we walked through, and I want to say it was the Wednesday before Thanksgiving that we walked through. Is that right? Something like that. So it's still minimum, I would guess, of 2 weeks out. I would guess closer to after the first of the year with the holidays and everything else. So.
Anything else? All right, thank you, David. Mr. Rankin.
Going back to the staff reports, I knew David would be here because of wastewater plan. We canceled the last regular meeting, that's why I told Carlos it was a special meeting on wastewater, so I just asked him to give a written report only. As well as myself, a couple of things I want to give updates on. Received a response back from CDOT, I think I mentioned this in the last meeting, on the devolution of Main Street in Vasquez. Roughly about a 4.2 cost estimate by our engineer to reconstruct Main Street from 85 to kind of a 28, which is the full length of Main Street, and also about a 1.4 lane to reconstruct Vasquez Boulevard. Nothing fancy, but a reconstruction of the asphalt in the other lane with some curb and gutter. CDOT came back with, well, as far as Vasquez, they said we could have it, but they're not going to budget a dime for that. They have no plans of maintenance. Which upsets me a little bit. They own the road. They're responsible for it. And as far as Main Street, CDOT offers just a one-liner, 1.2 million. So the option is to accept, decline, or resubmit. I'm going to meet with Steve Gutierrez. We're going to focus on Main Street. This is like poker in my mind. So we're going to talk to Steve, see what we can cut out, represent another proposal to CDOT. I'm not willing to take over Vasquez unless they put money into it at all. So, I mean, that's just, but it's a little disappointing, but this is how the process went. The last week at the Upper Front Range meeting, I met with Chris Cross, the assistant manager for Fort Lupton. There, the process of completing devolution on Denver Avenue, which is what people assume is their main street, which is not, but it's their main drag of businesses, from 52 north to where it connects to 85. So a similar stretch of the length of road. And they're looking at 2.2 million approval from CDOT for devolution. So I think it's worth our time to go back and talk to them. But I don't want to get where Kersey was a few years ago and got 80,000 for theirs, which is an $800,000 project. So that was one update. Also, going back to that Upper Front Range meeting last week, Johnny Olson brought a, ironically, he asked about the Interceptor. We just got in, but Johnny Olson brought the CMAC vehicles. Still, there's nothing confirmed. The feds will not accept these waivers, these Buy American waivers ever again. So the CMAQ funds are pretty much off the table, but what they're looking at doing in the next 60 to 90 days potentially is trading money. The CMAQ funds could also be used for other air quality mitigation projects. So Bell County is pursuing a way to get those funds to offset the cost of their other projects, which are CMAQ projects, because it's not just vehicles, it's infrastructure improvements, like pedestrian sidewalks. Then that money that Will County would save by getting that grant money, they would then help all these municipalities out by buying vehicles. So even though we just buy interceptor, we have more vehicles in the line to be replaced, so if that happens, we can still do that 2019. So it's not completely off the shelf to replace the public works and the police vehicles in the next year. I spoke with Colette today from Valley Village. Actually today, they made their first payment of the 6-month payment plan on that usage issue because the water meter wasn't reading correctly. She said they're fine with that for the next 6 months. They just want to start a month early. And I wanted to give the board an update on that one. Last week, right before the senior holiday meal, actually the regular meal on Monday, I approved the pre-application, the pre-submittal for the senior bus. And as you well know, Curtis Mork and the seniors are doing a tremendous job with donations. So the hard numbers right now is the senior bus as of today is $62,739. The CDOT match of 80% is $50,191, and the town/senior match of 20% is $12,548. There's over 8,000 now in the fund for the donation fund, and they still have to sell the van this next year, which will hopefully get us a few more thousand out as well. So looks like the seniors are pretty much paid their own way, so it sounds like. So
I deposited $2,500 in the bank today.
That's from
I will
Anadarko?
get that, yeah, I'll give you
Yeah.
that.
and that's not part of the 8,000 that's already in the bank. So you did a tremendous job. Thank you, Nuri.
You guys like to take on paying for a sewer plant too? You're doing so well with
Well,
your.
we could go out with our little.
Careful.
I think we look pathetic and people just.
Couple more things. I did confirm today with Roy Rudisill and Barb Kirkmeyer, Commissioner Kirkmeyer, that they will be here on Tuesday, February 12th from 1 to 3 for officials emergency management training. And then ironically today I also heard back from Rich Warner and Kathy Schultz from State Colorado. That same afternoon, once elected officials training is done, from 3 to 5, they will meet with the board, talk about incentive programs for development, enticement, and they help other communities develop the economic strategy to entice. I'm relying on them because this is what they do professionally, so I thought I'd bring them in. And then they'll talk also about our enterprise zone and how that is a benefit to Platteville. It's expanded over the years. I work with Kathy Schultz. It used to be just a very small section of town, and we have to get state approval in the enterprise zone. It's an economic development incentive program, and now encompasses the entire town limits essentially. So that helps out a lot. That way we can bring in growth and do that.
So the first one's from 1 to 3.
One on Tuesday, February 12th, 1 to 3 is elected official emergency management training, and Roy thought 2 hours was plenty of time. And then 3 to 5 would be upstate Colorado economic development discussion. So that will be a busy afternoon, but I think it'll be well worthwhile for the board on both of those.
Okay.
And finally, today I heard back from Connie Woodard at Excel Energy. Next Monday they start putting in the 3 new tree lights at Circle Boulevard. Which she also said is a separate design, but it also includes a new transformer and a new light at the corner or at the intersection of 32.5 and Sturport, so dark that for the lagoon will light that up as well. She just hasn't sent that plan to me yet.
On that corner, I've noticed it, and my wife has noticed it too. There's been people have not realized there's a stop sign there, and they're still running that. I think it's just around the corner, and she was asking off the circle, turn on 32.5.
Okay.
And so, is there, you know, some places have the flashing red lights above the stop sign. Do we have anything like that put on there, or that would?
We don't have anything like that. Typically what happens is it's one of two ways. You either, we have looked at them in the past. I don't know that it was in that light, but we had looked at, you have the option, they either have to have power, or you have to have a solar set up with the battery and that kind of thing. I have not researched it for that. I want to say the last time that I had looked, we looked at a solar speed sign at one point,
Right.
and those are in the neighborhood of $2,500 to $3,000.
Just a light though.
So I'm not positive, I haven't researched it, but if you're saying the northbound, people aren't stopping for the
Right.
northbound one?
Right, yeah, she's seen it a couple
And,
times.
and we put a 36-inch stop sign, which an 18 or a 24 is the standard size you see. If you notice, that one's on double poles.
Right.
And we have had the orange flags on it at times. The wind is really hard on those and just rips them off there pretty quick. But that would be a possible solution, would be to see if we could put something like that.
And I've seen it, she brought it up, she said she saw almost an accident last week.
Sure.
You know, just people just not, just running right through that, thinking that it was still that little corner, not realizing there was a stop sign there.
And getting that lit up will help, help illuminate that. But we'll definitely take a look at it and come back with you with a proposal. So I think that's a good one to.
That's a major intersection for the town.
You see, some towns will have like on the crosswalks, they'll have the crosswalk signs flash when there's a pedestrian inside,
Yeah.
something similar to that.
Does Excel have any update on our Main Street underground?
I was going to just get to that. When we finish up with Connie first, Sturkle, so those 3/4 lights will start next week on that installation process. Also talked to Connie on behalf of the fire district. There's a utility pole at Reynolds and Main, right next to Rachel Brandon's house. That needs to be relocated to the other side or further away for that storm drain that we're going to put in. So that's a separate project, but she's looking at seeing if we can underground that whole block. And eventually I'd like to have all the power lines on all the Reynolds and a lot of other places, Grand Avenue underground. And she may be able to pull that off at any cost to the town. So I'm waiting on that. Right now things are very slow with Excel because they're losing people to retirement. They're not replacing people. So going in, and Connie's retiring as well. And in this month, I think.
Rumor has it, we'll see when she actually pulls the trigger.
So going back to Al Armour at Excel Engineering Division, he's one of 3 down there that does the engineering for the entire state. Got him on the phone the other day, which is not easy to do. He apologized again. He said, I'm about done with it a few months ago, and then I get these big contracts, these big developers paying high dollars to Excel to get their approval on the permitting. He said, I have to drop yours, I have to do theirs. Because you're not paying me a dime. I said, I get that. But he thought for sure mid to late January, he finally had the numbers and the cost estimates and the design done. So I will bring that to the board as soon as I get that. But the undergrounding is 4 blocks. But part of that is once that comes back, Dave and I have to work with, was it CenturyLink that's on those poles? And that's gonna be, we can't pay for that. We have to negotiate that with CenturyLink out of our own pocket. It's not part of the undergrounding franchise fee. But he did still feel that we had plenty of money in our franchise fee under 1% undergrounding fund to pay for this project. So in the future, I'd like to do the rest of Main Street, some other areas of town, but we're not there yet, obviously. So, but otherwise, I just want to get some updates on that. Before last Tuesday. Adrian, you have some meetings scheduled tomorrow.
Yes, so we have our study session for tomorrow regarding the committees. The agenda looks fantastic. I've had the middle school, they were supposed to have their concert tonight. They got moved to next Tuesday night. So I have actually 4 people who've contacted me and they can't go, or they're not gonna come to the committee meeting because, so, do we wanna stick it or keep it in December, or do we wanna move it to January, the first one?
Well, we need those people here for the startup, so.
Yeah, I mean, the other option is doing another startup meeting in January, because we go past the 18th, it's holidays. I just don't think, it's just gonna get worse the farther on we go.
Yeah, let's
Yeah.
just do it in January.
I agree. Who knows who's gonna be able to come in January though? That's one of those things. Could be 4 people.
Yeah, but
that
there's
have
like a
something going
whole
on in
thing
January.
going on in January, and then it's gonna be.
Yeah, well, these 4 people would be specific to the concert movie, because it's choir and then all band and middle school, so. what day then? And then still keep the study session for tomorrow? You guys are okay with that? Yes. We talked about this last week. Yeah.
Were you here?
And Mayor, just so you know, the first Tuesday's the first, so that meeting's canceled. The second Tuesday on the 8th, we're scheduling a Board of Adjustments hearing for the variance request from the fire district. And then we have a planning commission and board meeting back to back on the 15th. So just FYI. And then so the 21st maybe, if you stay on a Tuesday, you don't have to do that, you can do it on Wednesday.
Yeah, I was rolling around January 9th, if everybody's okay with that. Because you guys are big with this, moving it together, so. If we move then from December 18th to January 9th. Can we do that, please, Mary?
What time?
At 7, please.
January 8th.
9th, a Wednesday,
So,
at 7. Yes, please, and then tomorrow's study session, we'll go over thoughts and ideas and make sure we're all on the same page for moving forward on January 9th with these committees.
What time tomorrow?
7.
January 9th, 7 o'clock.
Yep.
So unless there's packet information, we're not sending anything out, we're supposed to be general notice.
Yes, and you did send an Everbridge notification out. Can you also send one out about the holiday light contest?
I forgot about that last week, I apologize. There's a long message I sent last week.
Yes, you did, yes.
I will send that out this week, and we'll have all of next week and the judge.
Okay,
So it'll give you a full week to do the judging. There's a lot of lights. I
perfect, there is, yeah,
took my nieces out Saturday night, it took us a long time to get down.
yeah.
There's a lot of lights, which is awesome.
Yeah, fantastic, fantastic. David, the lights were off, at the community Christmas tree.
Yeah, somebody walked by and unplugged it.
Oh,
Well, that's
I
nice.
discovered that the next morning. Yes, it's been remedied.
The neighbor. I was like, forget it.
So, I will be stopping to see if I can pick up a device that should discourage that type of behavior.
okay.
I mean, I'd like to electrify the.
I was gonna say, what kind of a
but,
device, but maybe we don't wanna know. Okay, perfect. Thank you, guys. And that's all I have. I have a Highway 66 Coalition meeting on Friday. If anybody wants to join me at 7:30 in the morning.
Oh,
It's at the Southwell, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Don't you know? So,
Does Platteville get talked about in that coalition meeting?
nope. Puzzle gets
We're part of the coalition because we're part of 66, but the main focus, they're doing their Pell study like we did on 85, and we're 2 miles outside of that study because we're in the upper front range, not Dr. Cobb.
Yeah.
And so only the Dr. Cobb portion, the Denver Regional Council of Government is Dr. Cobb.
I was wondering, what was this Dr. Cobb?
Denver-
Who is this guy? Who is this doctor?
It's not a real doctor, it's the Denver Regional Council of Government, so it's just called Dr. Cobb nickname.
So it's not a terribly beneficial coalition for Platteville, unfortunately.
Unfortunately, it is not, but maybe that'll change. So, yes. And anything else before the board? Alrighty, we stand adjourned, 8:17. Thank you, guys.
See how long we can.